Good morning, party people. It is weekend here in Manhattan. Got the Manhattan skyline there behind me. I am sitting in Brooklyn. Came up to Brooklyn for the weekend to go hang out with the Darlings for their annual, Eric Darling, for their annual Halloween party. So I dressed up as a Day of the Dead guy. I should probably try and dig up. I don't think there are any pictures of me. I think the best we have for a picture is I'm sitting in the background somewhere. And I regret that. I totally should have taken pictures with Eric. Eric was Fancy Feast. He had a cat head and fancy clothes on, so he was Fancy Feast. And his wife was a vampire. It was pretty funny stuff. All right, so let's go see what questions y'all have. So the top voted question is Dylan. Dylan asks, do you have any experience with sysdmdb tuning recommendations? To be clear, I'm not referring to Azure or automatic index tuning, but rather query store forcing and unforcing plans automatically. It says, even if not set to automatic, have you seen clients manually utilize this data? So clients know. In training classes, yes. I cover it in my mastering parameter sniffing class, where I talk about using, not the DMV, but to query store to automatically grab plans that go high wire and force it back to a previous good plan. And I talk about why it's not really a silver bullet. It's one of those features that I don't think does a lot of damage, but at the same time, it doesn't really help all that much either. So it's one of those where if people really believe in it, I'm like, sure, go ahead and turn it on. It's just not usually going to be the one thing that gets your entire server across the finish line. Again, I don't recommend against it. It's just not that I preach it because, you know, I got to pick my battles with what I teach y'all to do. And I have found over time that it's really hard to convince people to do things. And so if I'm going to convince you to do something, I got to pick something that's extremely likely that you'll do and that will have a very big difference in your server. I'm still trying to fight the war of people running defragmentation and updating statistics every night when all you're really doing is just blowing the plan cache and making your server vulnerable to parameter sniffing. That's the particular religious war that I've been on lately. Next up, Borninthematrix asks, hi Brent, we frequently get deadlocks on thread errors as opposed to a specific resource. I can use sp-blitzlock to pull out the query plan, but do you have any tips on how we can pinpoint the specific part of the query plan that encountered the deadlock on thread error? You're going down the wrong rabbit hole. What you need to do is you need to be aware that, there's a truck going by here, hold on a second. You need to be aware that the problem is most likely just that the query is going massively parallel, and what you need to do is focus on reducing the work that the query does, less about micromanaging the threads and more about figuring out how do I reduce the amount of work that the query does. Look at improvements for index tuning, removing non-sargeable parts of queries, things like that. Next up, Stranger asks, is data warehouse design a DBA skill or is it a BI expert skill? If you search for Brent Ozar job duties, I've got a job duties blog post where I lay out a little grid of who does what. And then the thing that you'll be surprised by is that there's no such thing really as just DBA. It's really broken out into different skill sets. Data warehouse design is something that usually involves a lot of talking. It involves a lot of talking to human beings to find out what's the source of this data, where does this data live, how do we describe this data, what kinds of data are the end users asking for, like what are they looking for in their reports. It's very much a talking skill and a documentation skill, and that's very different from database administration. Database administration is typically more about talking to machines, less about talking to people. Next up, Stuart asks, I need to delete millions of rows from some tables, and so I need to do some in batching. The criteria for identifying rows requires a join, and therefore I can't use the fast top end delete method using a view or CTE. Do you have any deletes or recommendations? Yes, Stuart, you absolutely can use the fast technique. What you have to do is you have to do some prep by dumping out all of the IDs that you need to delete into a table first. And I covered that. We spent about half an hour, 45 minutes on it in my mastering query tuning class, but just that description alone might be enough to get you across the finish line. Go create a permanent table, not a temp table, because it's going to take some time. You want to be able to persist past object or past server reboots. Dump the list of IDs that you need into a permanent table, and then join to that table using the IDs over to the table that you need to delete on. If you write the query right, you can get a clustered index scan or clustered index seek that works well for performance on both tables, on both the list of IDs that needs to be deleted and the table that you're deleting from. So totally works there. And I demo that in the class. DrDrakken asks, Hi Brent, my friend has a query that consists of several subqueries and takes minutes to execute. There are multiple usages of getDate in the where clause. Does this mean that not all the where clauses will use the exact same time? And would it be better to use a variable? No, they'll all use the exact same time. You should be completely fine there. The dates should all be evaluated at the beginning of execution rather than as the query is executing. The times where you can get something different like that happening is with triggers. If you have a trigger that fires for every row that's deleted, let's say, and you go delete 1 million rows and the trigger's firing one at a time, if you're deleting the rows one at a time, that can cause you problems. But Accidental DBA asks, Hi Brent, what's the setting we need to enable in SQL Server 2019 to see the actual query plan in sp-blitzlock? Well, in sp-blitzlock, it flat out says, there's a live query plan column. It flat out says live query plans not enabled. Go to this URL and you can get more information. Then go to that URL in order to get more information. I wouldn't recommend going to find the place where you can ask me questions, typing out a question, and then waiting hours, days, or weeks before I answer it, rather than just clicking on the column that has the information that you're seeking. But that's just me. DBA Champion says, Hi Brent, is there a way to see who upvoted or downvoted my posts on dba.stackexchange.com? No, that is not part of the public data dumps for kind of obvious security type purposes. You wouldn't want to have people getting into trouble for what they downloaded. I assume. I don't know that. It could actually be visible in the votes table. I don't think downvotes are, though. I don't think downvotes are. But, okay, so I'll tell you where you can go look to find out for sure. In the DBA.stackExchange, I don't do data dumps for that. Oh, that's true. You want DBA.stackExchange. What you would have to do is use the, okay, so go to where you, that's a long answer. Excuse me. Go to where you download the Stack Overflow data dumps from. Go to brentozar.com/go/querystack. On that page, I link to the Stack Overflow data dumps. At that same place, you can also get the data dumps for Stack Exchange. On that page, I also link to the Stack Overflow data dump importer, SODDI, and that's the tool that you can use to extract the data dumps or import the data dumps into a SQL Server database, and then you can start querying. If you want to do a test first, though, go look at the Stack Overflow data dump and see if you can actually see downvotes in the votes table that include both the post ID and the user ID who did it. I don't think you're going to find that, though. What I would probably say is zoom out a little. Why are you trying to do that? If you're worried that someone somewhere has a vendetta against you, instead look internally, or what are the reasons that they're downvoting this, whatever it is that I did. Next up, Camaro322. Good to hear from you. Camaro322 says, hi Brent, my friend, nicely done, is loading SQL Server tables from Oracle tables with over 100 million records. What's a good way to determine which records have changed since the last data pull? The source data does not have a last update date and records can change at any time. Use SQL Server integration services, and integration services has the ability to keep a copy of the source and destination tables cached and can join them together and look for any differences between the columns. What you could do in theory is run checksums across the entire row on both sides, but that's going to be very CPU intensive. I wouldn't want to do that work on the SQL Server. That's really what SSIS is really great at. Boris asks, hey Brent, what's the best way to migrate just the SQL schema? So if you're talking about a one-off temporary thing, I would probably look at DBATools. DBATools is a PowerShell framework that lets you do all kinds of commonly needed database tasks like scripting out schemas. And I'm pretty sure they have a commandlet that lets you choose what parts of the schema you want. If it's something that you wanted to automate on a regular basis, I would look at Redgate Schema Compare. Redgate Schema Compare is, as far as I know, like the main game in town for that kind of thing. It's been out there for a really long time, so really well documented and easy to use. Next up, Stuart says, hi Brent, totally off topic, but myself and some coworkers were having a wager as to what floor your apartment is on, based on the view from your camera during recent session submissions. The most popular is 28. Are we close? Yes. Next up, Ron asks, hello Brent, I see you have a DBATools database. What do you keep in there? The only thing that I keep in there these days, because I don't do database administration these days, I'm just a consultant and I parachute rapidly from one client to the next. I use it as the output for my sp-blitzlock tables. So like when I log sp-blitzlock to table every 15 minutes, I keep the output in there. I have just always, since I've been working as a database administrator, I have always named my tools database DBATools. It's a happy coincidence that that's also the PowerShell framework's name. Total coincidence, but it's, I mean, I've known other database administrators who have things like DBAdmin as their database name, but that's all I keep in mind. For any kinds of commands that I want to run, scripts that I install, I just put those in the master database so that I can call them from any database. Next up, That's All Folks asks, hi Brent, our systems engineers are considering setting up a big storage bay with tiering enabled to host all of our VMs. A big storage bay with tiering. I think there's something that I don't understand there. What's your thought on that, given that we have 50 virtual machines and 100 databases and high concurrency reads 1 week per month only? So as much as I wish I could do personalized architecture design inside a 30-second answer on YouTube, that's really where, like, I have more questions from this than anything else. The first thing that I would remind you, though, is that RAM covers a whole lot of sins. So if you're worried about reads, and especially high concurrency reads, usually that means fighting over the same data pages, those are cached in RAM anyway. But I have bigger questions about what a single big storage bay with tiering means. Like, is this a commercial appliance or what it is? And that's really where consulting comes in. And I'm not saying go ask someone else on YouTube. I mean, like, just seriously, that's way beyond what you can get as a good answer for free on YouTube. And then last up, Accidental DBA asks, hi Brent, do you have any thoughts on using SQL CLR to perform cache invalidation using SQL triggers? That screams like a bad idea to me. I don't like the sounds of that very much myself. I think what I would much rather do is whenever an application makes a change that invalidates cache, have application, whatever's doing the insert, update, or delete, go also post a message to your cache to do that invalidation. Because the problem is that anything you do inside a trigger is holding up the transaction. And you wouldn't want to hold up a transaction while you shell out or go off to some other application server and wait for a response over the network. That's just a really bad idea. All right, so there's a quick rundown of your favorite top voted questions. I am now going to go head over there to the foggy Isle of Manhattan and go hit the Museum of Modern Art today. There's an automobilia exhibition that I'm going to go take a look at and go see that, and probably go do some shopping as well. And then I'm flying back tomorrow, fly back to San Diego to go be back home and tend to my Black Friday sale, so I get to watch and keep an eye on all of y'all as you're buying my training at deeply discounted rates. Woohoo! So I will see y'all at the next office hours. Adios.